Alara had survived 3 months in the vampire court by mastering a single skill: invisibility. She kept her eyes on the flagstones, her footsteps silent, her breathing shallow. The Grand Hall of Castle Drackle was a place where humans served and did not speak, where the immortal lords feasted on wine darker than any vintage, and where one misstep could mean a swift, permanent end. Tonight was the spring banquet, and every surface gleamed with gold that seemed to drink the light rather than reflect it. The air itself felt heavy, oppressive, as if the stone walls remembered every secret they'd witnessed over the centuries. But it wasn't the ancient vampire lords that made Alara's hands tremble as she carried her silver tray through the crush of silk and shadow. It was the high table. King Aldrich sat at its center like a figure carved from pale marble and winter itself, his obsidian crown catching the candlelight in sharp, warning flashes. His presence commanded the room without a single word, a gravitational force that bent everything toward him. Beside him, small and painfully alone, sat Prince Alaric. 7 years old, with hair as dark as his father's and eyes that held an ocean of unspoken words. The other nobles pretended the boy didn't exist. Servants set his plate down without meeting his gaze. Even his own tutors addressed the king when discussing the prince's progress, as if the child were merely furniture in his father's house. Alara had seen it all, had felt the cruel weight of that calculated neglect, but she'd learned the court's first rule: do not interfere with royal affairs. She was 3 steps from the high table when someone jostled her from behind. Time fractured into terrible slow motion. The silver tray tilted. 3 crystal goblets, priceless, ancient, slid forward with the inevitability of an avalanche. Alara lunged to catch them, but her fingers closed on empty air. The goblets hit the pristine white tablecloth directly in front of Prince Alaric with 3 distinct, catastrophic crashes. Red wine exploded across the white fabric like arterial blood, splashing onto the prince's pale hands, his ceremonial robes, spreading in a crimson stain that seemed to scream in the sudden, absolute silence. Every conversation died. Every head turned. Alara's heart stopped. The king's gaze found her, cold, ancient, lethal. But it was the prince's face that broke through her panic. Alaric stared at his wine-stained hands, his small shoulders drawing inward, his expression crumbling into something that looked like shame. He glanced up at his father, then away, as if expecting nothing. Because he'd learned to expect nothing. Something in Alara's chest twisted painfully. Her hands moved before her mind could catch up, before fear could stop her. Not the simple, crude gestures the village children used to mock those who couldn't speak, but something else entirely, something she'd seen only once, in a damaged manuscript she'd found in the servants' quarters, its pages illuminated with faded gold and arcane symbols she'd spent weeks trying to decipher. Her fingers formed the shapes with careful precision. "Are you hurt?" "I am sorry." The prince's head snapped up as if she'd shouted. His eyes went wide, impossibly wide, and his small hands flew up in response, trembling, urgent, forming signs that were nearly identical to hers but older somehow, more fluid, as if he'd been born knowing them. You know? You know the old words?" The hall held its breath. Alara's mind reeled. This was more than simple hand language. The manuscript had called it something else, something she barely understood. The silent tongue of the Drackle, spoken only by the sovereign princes of the ancient house, those chosen to hear the secrets the world could not bear. "Impossible," someone whispered from the gathered nobles. King Aldrich rose from his throne, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Alara's instinct screamed at her to run, to drop to her knees, to beg forgiveness. But Prince Alaric was signing again, frantically, desperately. His small face transformed with something she'd never seen there before. "Joy." The king's voice cut through the hall like a blade through silk. "What is your name, girl?" "Alara, your majesty." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "And where?" the king said, his words measured and dangerous. "Did you learn the lost language of my house?" Alara's mouth went dry. The manuscript. The forbidden manuscript she'd stolen time to read by candlelight, teaching herself the cryptic signs because something about them had called to her. had felt important in a way she couldn't explain. She'd stumbled into something ancient, something sacred, and judging by the way the king's eyes had locked onto her, not with rage but with something far more terrifying, she just made herself the most valuable and dangerous servant in the entire kingdom. She didn't know it yet, but the lonely monarch watching her from his throne had just made a decision that would change 3 lives forever. He would never let her leave. If you love stories where one small act changes everything, and you want to see how Alara survives the king's terrifying decision, you've come to the right place. Make sure you like and subscribe to join the Pack family. Also write in the comment where you're watching from. You are not going to want to miss what happens next. The summons came before dawn. Alara was escorted through corridors she'd never seen, past tapestries depicting ancient battles and portraits of long-dead princes, until she stood before the carved obsidian doors of the king's private study. The guards opened them without a word, and she stepped into a room that smelled of old leather and older blood. King Aldrich sat behind a desk of black wood, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. In the candlelight, his face could have been carved from ice, beautiful, terrible, utterly inhuman. He didn't speak for a long moment, simply watched her with eyes that had witnessed centuries pass like seasons. "Where did you learn it?" His voice was soft, almost gentle. Somehow that made it worse. Alara's throat had gone dry. "Your Majesty, the truth, girl. I can hear your heartbeat from here. Lies make it race." She forced herself to breathe. "The lower archives, Your Majesty. 3 months ago I found a manuscript while cleaning. It was damaged, discarded among texts marked for disposal. The pages showed hand symbols, drawings. I didn't know what they were, but they were beautiful and her voice cracked. I memorized them. I'm sorry. I didn't know they were forbidden. Show me." Alara's hands trembled as she formed the signs, one after another, the elaborate gestures flowing from muscle memory. Asterisk good morning. The sun rises. I am listening. Asterisk. King Aldrich's expression never changed, but something flickered behind his eyes, recognition perhaps. Or pain. "That manuscript," he said quietly, "was created 400 years ago by House Drakel's silent council. It was meant to be destroyed when the last council member fell in the blood wars." He rose from his chair, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. "You've stumbled onto a language that only 3 living souls should know. Myself, my son, and his tutor, who is sworn to secrecy upon pain of true death." Alara couldn't breathe. This was it. This was how she died. "You will be transferred," the king continued, "to the East Wing kitchens. Closer quarters. Closer to my son's apartments." He turned to face her fully, and for the first time, she saw something almost human in his ancient face. "You will continue your studies." The boy hasn't smiled in 3 years. Last night, he wept with joy. He moved closer, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Do you understand what you've become to him, little maid? You are his voice. And I will not allow you to leave." The first morning in the East Wing, Alara carried a breakfast tray of blood oranges and honey cakes to Prince Alaric's private chambers. Her hands shook so badly the porcelain rattled. The prince sat cross-legged on an enormous velvet cushion near the window, a leather-bound book open in his lap. When she entered, his head whipped around, and the book tumbled forgotten to the floor. His small face lit up like she'd brought him the sun itself. "You came back," his hands said, the movements quick and desperate. "I thought I dreamed you." Alara set the tray down carefully and replied, her gesture still clumsy compared to his fluid grace. "I'm real. And I'm here to stay." What began as a simple breakfast service transformed into something else entirely. Alaric pulled her down to sit beside him, his small fingers flying through signs with an urgency that spoke of years of pent-up words. He asked her everything, where she learned, what else she knew. Could she teach him more? When Alara formed the sign for Drakel's first moon, a ceremonial phrase from the manuscript, Alaric's eyes went wide. "That's from the old histories," he signed. "The ones father won't tell me. Show me more." So she did. Sign by sign, she shared what the illuminated pages had taught her. elaborate symbols that wove together into stories. The founding of their house, when the first Draco Lord had risen from the volcanic mountains. The Night of Seven Crowns, when vampire princes challenged the sun itself. The silent princes born without voice but blessed with prophetic sight, who had guided the kingdom through its darkest wars. No one ever told me this. Alaric signed, his movements sharp with emotion. My tutor only teaches me basic words. Father never speaks of the old ways. They treat my silence like a defect. It's not. Alara signed back firmly. In the old stories, the silent princes were sacred. They saw truths others couldn't hear. For a long moment, Alaric simply stared at her. Then his small shoulders began to shake. He wasn't crying, he was laughing, a soundless, joyful thing that shook his entire frame. He grabbed her hands, squeezing them tightly. You make me feel like I matter, he sighed when he finally released her. Like I'm not broken. Outside the chamber doors, King Aldrich stood perfectly still, watching through the narrow gap. His ancient fingers gripped the doorframe hard enough to crack the wood. He would not lose this. He would not lose her. It happened on the seventh night, when the moon hung fat and red over the palace towers. Alaric appeared at Alara's door in his nightclothes, a single candle clutched in his pale hand. His signs were urgent, conspiratorial. Come with me. There's something you need to see. She should have refused. Servants didn't wander the palace at night, and certainly not with the crown prince. But the fierce determination in his young face left no room for argument. They moved through shadowed corridors like ghosts, Alaric leading her past sleeping guards and through a concealed passage behind a tapestry. The air grew thick with the scent of old parchment and preservation spells. When he pushed open a towering iron door, Alara's breath caught. The royal library stretched before them like a cathedral of knowledge. Endless shelves climbing toward vaulted ceilings, ancient texts bound in leather and scales and stranger things. But Alaric didn't pause to marvel. He pulled her deeper, past the public collections, toward a section cordoned off by silver chains and warning glyphs that pulsed with protective magic. Father doesn't know I can pick these locks, he signed with a mischievous grin, producing a thin piece of wire from his pocket. Beyond the barrier, the books were different, older, wrapped in cloth, some radiating a faint otherworldly luminescence. Alaric pulled down a massive tome, its cover marked with the serpent sigil of House Draco, and opened it to pages filled with the same elaborate hand symbols Alara had memorized. But these pages also contained text. Ancient text in a dialect she could barely decipher. Read it, Alaric signed, pointing insistently. Alara leaned close to the candlelight, sounding out the archaic words. The silent princes of Draco are not afflicted but anointed. Their voicelessness is deliberate, a sacred mark of the old covenant. In silence they hear the whispers of fate. In stillness they perceive what the speaking cannot. Her voice trailed off as the implications crashed over her. She looked at Alaric, whose dark eyes shimmered with vindication. I'm not broken, he signed, his small hands fierce and certain. I'm exactly what I'm supposed to be. The most traditional heir House Draco has seen in 300 years. Alara's throat tightened. Does your father know? Alaric's expression darkened. He knows. But he's ashamed. He wants me to be like other princes, loud, commanding, normal. His signs grew sharp, angry. He doesn't understand that silence is my strength. Footsteps echoed in the outer library. They weren't alone anymore. The lessons began in earnest after that night. Every morning after breakfast, Alara would sit with Alaric in the small solar adjacent to his chambers. Sunlight, filtered through enchanted glass so it wouldn't harm him, painted golden squares across the marble floor. There she taught him the old signs, the ones that carried weight and history in every gesture. Sovereign, she signed, her hands forming a crown of fingers above her head, then drawing power down into her chest. Not just a ruler but one who rules from within. Alaric copied the movement, his young face serious with concentration. Then he added flourishes of his own, making the sign flow like water, like inevitability. Truth, Alara continued, pressing her palm flat against her heart before extending it outward. What comes from the core cannot be false. Witness, she showed him next. Eyes wide, hands framing the face. The silent princes were the kingdom's witness. They saw what others missed. Each sign was a reclamation. Each gesture, a piece of armor against the world that had called him defective. Alaric absorbed them with desperate hunger, practicing until his small hands ached, until the movements became as natural as breathing. What Alara didn't know was that they were never alone. King Aldrich had taken to standing in the concealed alcove beyond the solar, hidden behind the carved screen that allowed him to observe without being seen. Day after day, he watched his son transform, watched the boy's spine straighten, watched confidence bloom in shoulders that had always been hunched with shame. He watched Alara sign strength and prophecy in sacred silence, and saw his son's face shine with understanding. The king's jaw would tighten. His ancient hands would clench until his nails drew blood from his palms. He had spent 7 years trying to find a cure for Alaric's silence. 7 years of the finest healers, the most powerful mages, the most learned scholars. He'd offered fortunes, made threats, bargained with entities that should not be named. All because he believed his son was broken. All because the court whispered that a mute prince could never rule. But watching them now, watching his son laugh soundlessly at something Alara signed, watching the boy's hands move with authority and grace, King Aldrich finally understood the truth. His son had never been broken. He had been. The king turned away from the screen, his expression twisted with something that might have been grief, or rage, or both. Outside the solar, Lord Chancellor Valerius watched the king watch his son, and smiled coldly into his wine. The summons came on parchment sealed with the Chancellor's crimson wax, a serpent devouring its own tail. Alara was escorted to the administrative wing, a place of cold efficiency far removed from the opulent staterooms. Lord Chancellor Valerius received her in an office lined with maps of neighboring territories, each one marked with colored pins denoting alliances, conflicts, resources. War made practical. He was younger than the king, perhaps only 3 centuries old, with sharp features and calculating eyes that assessed her like a column of numbers in a ledger. "Sit," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Wine." "No thank you, my lord." "Smart girl. Never accept drinks from predators." He smiled, showing a hint of fong. "Let's speak plainly then. You've become quite important to the young prince. His father watches your lessons like a man watching his house burn." Alara's hands folded in her lap. "I only teach him what was already his birthright." "His birthright?" Valerius leaned back, fingers steepled. "Tell me, girl, do you know why the tradition of silent princes ended 300 years ago?" She remained quiet. "Because the last one was torn apart by our enemies during a failed negotiation. He couldn't shout for help, couldn't rally troops, couldn't even scream." The Chancellor's voice was cold, matter-of-fact. "The kingdom lost half its territory in the war that followed. Silence stopped being sacred. It became suicide." He rose, moving to the windows that overlooked the training yards below. Vampire soldiers drilled in perfect formation, their movements brutal and efficient. This is the world we live in now. Not the mystical past of prophets and omens, but one of steel and strategy. Our enemies multiply. The werewolf clans grow bold. The human kingdoms forge new alliances. He turned back to her. "We need a prince who can command armies, negotiate treaties, inspire fear. Not one who hides behind a servant girl's hands." Valerius placed a leather purse on the desk between them. It clinked heavily. 500 gold sovereigns. A letter of recommendation to any household in the kingdom. "You'll want for nothing." His eyes glittered. "All you need to do is request a transfer. Stop the lessons. Let the king find a real solution. A spell, a binding, something to give the boy a voice that matters." Alara stared at the purse. "He already has a voice," she said quietly. "You just refused to hear it." The Chancellor's smile vanished. "Then you're a fool. And fools don't last long in this court." Alara clutched the transfer papers in her trembling hands as she walked toward Alaric's chambers. The Chancellor had made it official. She was to leave at dawn for a minor lord's estate 3 provinces away. Far enough that she'd never return. It was safer this way. Smarter. The court was a nest of vipers, and she was only human. But when she pushed open the door to the solar, the words died in her throat. Alaric sat hunched in the window seat, his small frame silhouetted against the dying light. He'd been crying. She could see the tracks on his pale cheeks even from across the room. When he looked up and saw her, his hands began to move frantically. "They're sending you away. I heard the servants talking." His signs were jagged, desperate. "Everyone leaves. My mother left. My tutors leave. Even father barely looks at me anymore." "Alaric, you were different," he signed, and his hands were shaking so badly he had to start the phrase twice. "You made me feel like I mattered. Like I wasn't just the broken prince everyone whispers about." Alara's vision blurred. She looked down at the papers in her hands, her ticket to safety, to a normal life, to freedom from the dangerous games of immortal courts. Then she looked at the 7-year-old boy who'd been alone his entire life until she stumbled into it with a tray of spilled wine. The transfer notice tore cleanly down the middle. Then again. And again. Until the pieces scattered across the marble floor like snow. Alara crossed the room and dropped to her knees in front of Alaric. Her hands moved with fierce certainty. "I'm not going anywhere," she signed. "Friends don't leave. Not for gold. Not for safety. Not ever." Alaric's face crumpled. He threw his arms around her neck, his small body shaking with soundless sobs. Alara held him tight, feeling his tears soak through her sleeve, and wondered what she just condemned herself to. On the hidden balcony above, King Aldrich gripped the stone railing hard enough to crack it. He'd heard the Chancellor's offer, had waited to see what the girl would choose, gold and life or loyalty and danger. She'd chosen his son. The king's ancient heart, which had not truly beaten in centuries, seemed to stir with something almost painful. This mortal girl, this fragile thing, possessed what he'd thought impossible. The power to reach his son's isolated world. And she would die. Humans always did. In 50 years, perhaps 60, she would age and wither and leave Alaric alone again. Unless... King Aldrich's eyes gleamed in the darkness as a terrible, perfect solution took shape in his mind. She chose him. She chose loyalty over safety. That moment right there is everything. If you felt that powerful connection between Alara and Alaric, and you believe that's a choice worth making, let me know by tapping the subscribe button. Welcome to the family. Now let's see what this solution is. The midnight bells had just finished tolling when the chamber door opened without a knock. King Aldrich stood in the doorway, still dressed in his formal court regalia, the heavy crown of House Draco casting shadows across his ageless face. Alara, who'd been reading to Alaric from an illustrated bestiary, shot to her feet and immediately dropped into a curtsy. Alaric's eyes went wide. "Leave us," the king said quietly. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The Chancellor had won. She'd be dragged to the dungeons or worse. "All 3 of us," Aldrich clarified, stepping fully into the room and closing the door behind him. "I meant leave the pretense. The formality." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. "Please. Sit." Alara exchanged a confused glance with Alaric, but slowly lowered herself back onto the cushion. The king crossed the room with measured steps, then did something that made them both freeze. He knelt. King Aldrich, sovereign of the vampire realm, ancient warrior who'd conquered kingdoms and brought nations to their knees, knelt on the floor before his 7-year-old son. "I have failed you," he said, and his voice was raw with centuries of suppressed pain. "Every day of your life I have failed you." Alaric's hands began to move, but Aldrich shook his head. "Let me finish. Please." He looked down at his own hands, large, scarred from countless battles, stained with the blood of enemies and ages. These are warriors' hands. They know how to hold a sword, how to crush a throat, how to sign treaties and seal fates. But they are too rough, too clumsy for the language you speak. The language of our house. Of our history. He looked up at Alara then, and she saw something in his ancient eyes she'd never expected to see: vulnerability. I have watched you teach him strength, watched you give him something I never could, the knowledge that his silence is not shame but power. His jaw tightened. I was wrong. I have been wrong for 7 years. And I. The great king's voice broke entirely. I don't know how to speak to my own son. Alaric's small hand reached out slowly, hesitantly, and touched his father's cheek. The king's eyes closed as if the gesture caused him physical pain. When Aldrich opened them again, he looked at Ilara with desperate intensity. Will you teach me? He asked. Will you teach me how to speak to him? How to tell him I'm sorry? How to be his father instead of his warden? The private council convened in the dead of night. Only the king's most trusted advisers, Lord Chancellor Valerius notably absent. King Aldrich stood before them, his presence filling the chamber like gathering thunder. At the spring procession, he announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, Prince Alaric will address the court. Murmurs rippled through the assembled vampires. He will speak in the language of our founding house, the language of the silent princes. Aldrich's eyes glinted dangerously. And anyone who questions his fitness to rule will answer to me personally. No one dared object. The council dispersed into the shadows, leaving only whispers in their wake. King Aldrich remained standing long after they'd gone, staring at the throne that would one day belong to his son. Then he sent for Ilara. She entered his study with her heart in her throat, still wearing her nightdress beneath a hastily thrown cloak. The king stood by the window, backlit by moonlight, his silhouette sharp as a blade. Do you know why I've summoned you? He asked without turning. No, your majesty. Because you are essential. He said it flatly without warmth. A statement of fact. My son has found his voice through you. His confidence. His strength. Without you he returns to isolation. To shame. To vulnerability. Ilara remained silent, unsure where this was leading. The court sees this. Valerius sees this. They recognize that to remove you is to cripple the prince. Now he turned, and his eyes were ancient and pitiless. You have enemies here, girl. Powerful ones. And you are human, fragile, mortal, devastatingly temporary. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. In 50 years you will age. In 60 you will die. And my son will be alone again, having tasted connection only to have it torn away. Aldrich moved closer, each step deliberate. I will not allow that. I cannot. Ilara's breath came shallow. What are you saying? I am saying that you have become indispensable to the crown prince of House Drackle. And the crown does not rely on things that can be killed by time or assassin's blades. He stopped directly in front of her, so close she could see the crimson flecks in his dark eyes. I am offering you immortality, Ilara, the vampire's gift. His voice was soft, almost gentle but edged with iron. You will be transformed. You will become one of us. And you will remain at my son's side for eternity. As his companion, his voice, his anchor to the world. And if I refuse? The king's expression didn't change. Then you condemn him to a life of loneliness. And I will not allow that either. The unspoken threat hung between them like a blade. The transformation took 3 nights of agony and 1 night of absolute silence. When Ilara woke on the 4th dawn, the world had sharpened into terrible clarity. She could hear heartbeats in distant corridors, smell the iron tang of blood from the kitchens below, feel the weight of immortality settling into her bones like chains made of starlight. Her reflection in the mirror showed eyes that now gleamed with amber, the distinctive mark of House Drackle. King Aldrich had kept his word. She would never leave his son's side again. The spring procession filled the grand plaza with thousands, vampire nobles in their finest regalia, visiting dignitaries from allied territories, even carefully vetted humans from the outer provinces. All had come to witness the crown prince's first public address. Ilara stood on the royal balcony beside Alaric, her new ceremonial robes marking her as something unprecedented, neither servant nor noble, but something the king had created specifically for her. The prince's voice, his interpreter, his bridge to the speaking world. Below, the crowd murmured with anticipation and skepticism. A mute prince addressing his people? Madness. Weakness. Then Alaric stepped forward, and the square fell silent. His small hands began to move, not with a child's hesitation, but with the authority of centuries of tradition. Each sign was precise, powerful, weighted with history. He spoke of the silent princes who had guided their house through darkness, of strength found not in volume but in clarity, of the old ways that made House Drackle sacred. And Alara, her voice now carrying the supernatural resonance of her new nature, translated his words into speech that rang across the plaza like a bell. I am Prince Alaric of House Drackle. I am the heir to the serpent throne. My silence is not my weakness, it is my crown. The crowd stood transfixed. This was not the broken boy they'd whispered about. This was something else entirely. Ancient power wrapped in a child's form, speaking through a voice that commanded attention. When Alaric finished, he turned to his father. King Aldrich stepped forward and signed clearly, deliberately, so all could see. Proud of you, my son. Then the king faced the assembly, his hands forming signs that Alara translated with fierce pride. She is his voice. She is his strength. She is home. Aldrich's expression was iron and fire. And by royal decree, the language of House Drackle will be taught throughout this court. Every lord, every advisor, every member of our house will learn to speak with the prince directly. This is not a request. And that is how you checkmate a court of vipers. The board has been flipped, the rules have been rewritten. If you want more stories with payoffs this satisfying, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. We deliver epic moments like this every single week. The message was clear. Adapt or be cast out. As the crowd erupted, some with applause, others with barely concealed fury, Alaric reached for Alara's hand. His small fingers squeezed hers and she squeezed back. She was immortal now. Bound to this house, this boy, this lonely king who'd moved heaven and earth to keep her. She was no longer human. But watching Alaric's face shine with pride and belonging, Alara realized she'd never felt more alive.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. Like, subscribe and hit the notification button.